Hi, welcome back to another storytelling episode. Today we are going to talk about something rather relevant, extremely relevant. So also I have an announcement to make at the end of today's video, so hold your horses, don't get too excited. So let's dive into today's topic first, which is that it is a truth universally acknowledged that the boring people at parties are the loud ones. This is like a sweeping generalization, but from, all of the shenanigans that I've been up to, recently, that turned out to be the case. So before Melbourne went into another snap lockdown, this time it was like 7 days or whatever, I've been around quite a bit. I've been around to like parties, gatherings, and I try to figure out who's around me. I try to figure out who's who, and I try to talk to absolutely everybody, which is what a storyteller, as a storyteller, that's what you do, right? So you want to go talk to absolutely everyone. You want to gather people's stories so you can turn them into stories, which is kind of like a bit of an evil thing to do. You're turning people's troubles into stories, but sorry, not sorry. So I went around quite a bit, and here is what I've concluded. There's like this camp of like loud people, right? They want to tell you absolutely everything. They want to tell you about their like misadventures. They want to tell you about their Friday nights. They want to tell you absolutely everything about themselves. These conversations typically, some of them could be interesting, but they typically ended up being some of the conversations where I just thought to myself, how do I get the hell out of here? How do I escape this conversation? Because they just bored me to tears. But there are also these people that are just kind of like on the fringes of these parties, on the fringes of like a gathering, a trivia night at a bar or whatever. But these people turn out to be some of the most interesting characters ever. And when I chat them up, I'm just like, hey, how's it going? What's up in your head? And blah, blah, blah. The first reaction, or like the first thing that they say, is just like, no, you don't want to hear about this. No, it's just not interesting. This is something that I think you won't be interested in. And I'm just like to myself, are you kidding me? That's like the most interesting thing I've ever heard. So there's this there's this kind of like discrepancy. So boring people think they're really interesting, and interesting people think they're really boring, which is a problem. So today's video is for the kind of like the boring people who think that they're not that interesting. So let me convince you that you are interesting. And if you ever meet me at a party, if you ever meet me anywhere, tell me those stories, because it only takes one person to give you the affirmation that, hey, you could tell a story, you're interesting. And, it always just takes one listener to really, bring the storyteller out of you. So here is kind of like my guide, or my advice to you if you want to tell stories at parties, if you want to be more interesting. If you are one of these people that if you don't exactly think that you're that interesting, I'm here to tell you otherwise. So recently I've been reading a book called The Philosophy of Andy Warhol, by Andy Warhol himself. And this book is just like a collection of some of the most brilliant writing I've ever read. And there's one paragraph or one vignette in here which really captured my attention. So it's about him going to a ball. And it's a really, really fascinating take on memory and storytelling. So I'm just going to read it out to you. So sometimes you're invited to a big ball, and for months you think about how glamorous and exciting it's going to be. Then you fly to Europe, and then you go to this ball, and when you think back on it a couple of months later, what you remember is maybe the car ride to the ball. You can't remember the ball at all. Sometimes the little times you don't think are anything while they're happening turn out to be what marks a whole period of your life. So that's where I'm going to end it. So let's think about that statement again. Sometimes the little times you don't think are anything while they're happening turn out to be what marks a whole period of your life. That to me explains, that statement there explained everything, right? Explained everything. Sort of like explained why a lot of people think that their lives are not that interesting. Because when life is happening, when you are living an event, when you're going through something, it's not like you don't know that you're going through it. It's just that when you, for example, go through like your first kiss or something, when you land in a position where you're just kind of like, oh my God, this is like the first day of my dream job, it just feels kind of mundane, right? Because in your head, it's just kind of like this glamorous thing that's happening. But when you're actually there, it feels kind of plain. So you're just going through the motions. You're just going through this kind of like, the bits and pieces. You're just kind of like, oh, this is not that interesting. There's nothing interesting about this. So that's like the default position, right? Most people think they're not interesting not because they're actually not interesting. It's because they're bad at noticing interesting events because everything's just mundane, right? Everything's just kind of like plain and boring. And because they don't have the distance, they don't have like that comedic distance to observe the event. They don't have that ability to kind of like pull themselves out of the event, to observe the event from like a third person perspective. That's the core of the problem. They don't have this ability to kind of like treat themselves as a character in a narrative, which if you do that, that story immediately becomes 20,000 times more interesting. So the first excuse that people give me whenever I sit them down and force them to tell me a story is that, it's just like not a very interesting story. It's just not a very interesting tale. I don't think I should tell you it because you'll get bored. I'm just like, maybe it's not the fact that the story is boring. It's just that you're bad at pinpointing what exactly is interesting, right? So you have a lot of these events in your own life. You have a lot of these like instances, vignettes or whatever, that are inherently interesting. They are probably more interesting than some of these crappy stories that some of these loud people told me. They're probably more interesting than anything you've ever heard on the radio. They're probably more interesting than anything out there. But to you, because it's you, because you're you, they feel rather mundane. They feel rather just kind of like out of whack. You don't know what to do with them, right? So here is why I think you should start keeping a diary. If you want to be a more interesting person at parties, if you want to be a more interesting conversationalist, keep a diary. Write about these mundane things, because what you realize is that once you write things down, once you put things down on paper, once you gain kind of like a comedic distance, once you gain a distance between yourself and that event, and you let it cool down a little bit, what's going to happen is that if you read that story out to people, if you read it out, or if you recount the event again, for example, a week later, you quickly realize that story was probably one of the most interesting things ever out of your entire life. That's probably one of the things that just people just kind of forget events over time, right? Without a documenting device, without like a diary, without a journal, without anything, without, memories, people just tend to forget. It could be like the most interesting thing that had happened to you, but you just because you forgot, you're just kind of like, oh my God, I forgot about it. I'm not going to tell you what it is because I forgot, which is a shame because these stories are inherently interesting. And if you don't have something to anchor these stories down, you're going to have a hard time, relaying potentially interesting instances to people when you're at parties, when you're just talking with someone, when you're like, when you're just floating about. So you want to start building up a repertoire of memories. So this is kind of like a repertoire of memories. So if you want to start a diary, I have a video for patrons on my Patreon page, which I'm going to link below. That video is kind of like my process of keeping my daily diary entries. So you can check that out if you want to. But in a sense, you want to build up like a repertoire of events and sort of like force yourself to write about the quote unquote boring stuff. And once they're down on paper, that's going to introduce like a comedic distance between you as the person and the event itself. Because as you're living through the event, it's just a mundane, right? You can't really see it happening in real time. But if you write it down or like record yourself telling the story or like put it somewhere or take a picture or whatever, use whatever method fits you. But if you have like a way of documenting this thing down, immediately that's going to like pull you out of the story. That's going to introduce like a distance, and that distance is crucial. And you want to keep that distance. You want to keep it between like yourself and the story. You want to keep this distance so that when you are recounting the story, you quickly realize that the story is actually really interesting. It is the lack of distancing between yourself and this event that's the main problem here. So you're not a boring person. Don't think for a second that you're a boring person. You're not that boring. Keep that in mind. And, all you're lacking is just that distance between the event and yourself. So what you really want to do here is to build up like a repertoire of memories, a repertoire of things that you want to tell to people. And you want to build that up as you are sort of like practicing this distancing effect. So the more distance that you can get from that event, the better the story will become. So next time when you go to a party, you can just be like, oh, I remembered this happened to me, or that happened to me. And you think to yourself, oh my God, I've actually been through a lot. It's really just about remembering things. And you need to build up a system for you to remember those things. And that's kind of like all I have to talk about in this video. That's everything that I have to offer in terms of the theoretical stuff. So here's the announcement. Based on what we've talked about before, so I went back to all of my diary entries from a few months back, and I compiled together some of the most comedic stories ever, some of the most kind of like emotional, comedic, and just bizarre things that had happened to me in the last 5 months. So I compiled everything together into a little collection, and I've been recording these little diary entries into audiobook entries. So I'm going to compile all of it together, and at the end of today's video, I am going to give you guys a little preview of one of the little chapters in this audiobook. So this audiobook will come out in about 2 weeks. I still have to do some finishing touches to this audiobook, but it is a project that I think it's really important. It's one of the more important projects for me personally, because this illustrated exactly what's missing from like people's lives, which is just this distance to view yourself as a character in a story, this distance to view yourself as kind of like a comedic character. So from that end, you don't really hear a lot of these stories because they're so mundane. People don't want to write about them, but that's exactly the kind of things I think we should write about because they're so mundane. These things are mundane for a good reason, right? Because they're so mundane, they're kind of like the most relatable stories to people. So I'm going to pause this video right here. I'm going to, get the hell out of here. I'm going to play you guys that clip. So I hope you guys are having a great day so far and wherever you are in the world. So this is the end of my rambles, and here's the clip.
Maybe I should follow the tracks. There are things you're kind of good at in life, and there are things you'll never get the hang of, no matter how hard you try. Chess, for example. I've always hated it and wanted nothing to do with it. The same goes for Tetris, golf, and above all else, politics. However, there are also things you have to put up with despite being really bad at them. Navigating Melbourne's tramway system is one such challenge. I promised to meet up with my sister Ada after my French class. She had an appointment in Camberwell and said that she wanted to stay there instead of coming to the city. I walked out of the class and went to the tram stop. Route 72 allegedly went to Camberwell, but I gave my flimsy memory too much credit. When I was collecting notes for my third novel, This Wonders with Letters, 3 years ago, I walked through Camberwell and I vaguely remember those little antique shops, the bench under the bridge, and the train tracks that spanned the lower half of the land. I was on a tram and a gentleman who sat across from me kept coughing while he was checking his phone. 3 minutes into the trip, his phone blasted. This divorce could be the end of the entire... And there it was, another case of people forgetting to put their phones on silent. I looked out of the window and looked for anything that resembled that Camberwell in my memory. After a while, I saw a bridge and some railway tracks below it, and without even thinking about it, I jumped up from my seat and signaled the conductor to open the door. "Thank you," I said and jumped off the tram. My surroundings looked somewhat familiar and I thought I was at the right place. I pulled out my phone and took a picture and sent it to Ada. "Hey, I'm here." I caught her on the phone. "Where the hell is that?" she said. "Well, Camberwell? That looks nothing like Camberwell. Where the hell did you get off?" I looked around me and the only sign I could find indicated Patron. "I think I mean Patron," I said. "That's not Camberwell," she sighed. As far as I was concerned, I just had another dumbass moment. These moments tend to come and go, but the stupidest ones just tend to stay with you and become a part of you. Ada's seen enough of this traffic-related idiocy for me, and I was surprised she still trusted me to take a tram alone. "I guess I'll just follow the tram track," I said. "No, check your map," Ada snapped. I checked my map and realized the real Camberwell was a good 40 minutes away. I was afraid to tell her that because I was already enough of a moron for getting up 40 minutes early. "Are you a while away?" Ada said. "Yeah. I mean, there's no way Camberwell is another 40 minutes away, right?" "It could be." She sounded annoyed. "You know what? Head back into the city. I'll just catch a train home. Let's catch up another day." "But..." I looked at a tramway. "It couldn't be 40 minutes. "Look, it's fine," she said. "It's good practice. You'll get it right next time.